So welcome to this morning's session. Well, I think we're just this morning. So this is the first session today in the budget optimization stream. So I'm Ian Nethercot, I'm Supply Chain Director at ProBrand. I'm going to be hosting this session today. I'm going to be speaking first, followed by my colleague Carl. I'm going to go through the first session. There will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions. We'll have a bit of Q&A as well if we've got time. So we'll get started with the first session, which is on overcoming complexity and volatility in the IT market. So this is quite a hot topic that I see all the time in this space. I do quite a lot of talks around this particular piece. So we're going to unpack this a little bit in this session, and then more importantly at the end I'm going to talk about some guidance and advice in terms of how to overcome some of these challenges that we see in the IT space. So first and foremost, who am I? So as I said, I'm Ian Nethercot. I'm Supply Chain Director for ProBrand. I've been in IT procurement now for 21 years. I know I don't look like it, but I have. I look after a spend of 35 million a year. I've done all kinds of things over the years for the industry. When the pandemic first broke, early 2020, I did some stuff on BBC Newsnight and ITV News at 10 around the kind of the impacts on the supply chain and bits and pieces like that. Any procurement people in the room, I do quite a bit for SIPs and put content into the CPD knowledge base system. So anything you want to talk about IT procurement, then certainly connect with me. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is actually the IT channel itself. So the supply chain in itself is something that lots and lots of customers and organisations that I speak to, actually a lot of people don't understand what an authorised supply chain actually looks like in this industry. And I've kind of just articulated here in quite a simple diagram. So there's essentially 4 tiers in the supply chain, and this is what we call an authorised supply chain. So right at the top is the vendors. So these guys that are out here today, you know, your HPs, your Samsungs, your EPOSes, your APCs, all of these people that are out here today, they sit at the top of the supply chain as the vendors. The vendors, obviously the manufacturers of the goods, and they will sell through to a distribution channel. So they have a set number of authorised distributors in the channel. The number of distributors differs depending on who the vendor is. It might depend on the category as well. So, but it tends to average probably around about 3 distributors for one vendor. It can be a bit more, can be a bit less. It just depends. But those are the distributors that will have a direct buying agreement and a relationship with those vendors. They will procure from the vendors and they will fill their warehouses with inventory and they will sell it out into the UK market. So the third tier to that are the resellers, which is where we are. So ProBrand are a reseller, so we sit in that third tier of the supply chain, and we traditionally procure from the distribution tier. We might have relationships, obviously, with the vendors, as we've got here today, from a strategic perspective, but in terms of the commercial arrangement, it's between us and the distributor. And then we sell on to you guys who are end customers. So you're at the bottom of the supply chain procuring through the reseller channel. So that is traditionally what an authorised model looks like, which is really important. The reason that we call this an authorised supply chain is because this is the only model in where the vendors get full line of sight of the procurement that you will do as an end customer, and it was only if you're procuring through this exact model. What a non-authorised supply chain looks like. This is an example of what can happen, and this is some of the often complexities that happen in the market. So you can see here there's this extra tier that's appeared within the supply chain, which is another reseller layer. So this is where resellers can buy off other resellers and then sell on into the market. There's lots of this that goes on in the market. It can be for different reasons. It can be because it might be to do with lack of partner status. It might be lack of buying power. It could be all kinds of different reasons why a reseller will buy from another reseller. What that means is that as soon as you have another tier that enters into the supply chain, it means that you're then all of a sudden not procuring through an authorised model. It means there's potential risks of the equipment that you're buying and where the origin of that equipment has come from. It means that you're not going to have necessarily the direct commercial arrangement with the vendors that you maybe want and that we would encourage. Carl's going to talk about a little bit more about that in the next session as well, around the importance of what that means, that the vendors have line of sight of what you buy. Really, really important. I'm not going to steal Carl's thunder in the next session. But certainly something for you to be aware of. And at the end, in terms of the guidance and advice, I'll talk a little bit about how you overcome some of this as well. So the next one, I guess the obvious one in terms of the whole volatility piece in the market, is around pricing and stock. Prices, as we probably all know, super volatile, changes all the time in this industry. Lots of different reasons why. I've put a few examples up here. This certainly isn't an exhaustive list of everything that goes on, but these are some of the examples of what causes the imbalance in pricing and things. So first one obviously is exchange rates. Lots and lots of products in this industry is bought based on exchange rates, based on the USD, might be based on euro. Those exchange rates, we all know, change all the time, and as soon as they change, it can affect price, and that ripples through the market. Certain vendors actually only publish pricing for one day because they literally work on a daily USD rate, so it's really difficult to try and keep ahead of that. The other one is supply and demand. I mean, I guess the obvious example of supply and demand is the pandemic. You know, when we saw demand just outstripping supply, you know, when there was all this demand for technology, for laptops, for webcams, for docking stations, all this equipment that people needed for working from home, all this huge amount of demand, and supply couldn't keep up. The manufacturers couldn't physically keep up with the amount of product that was required. So as soon as that happens, it causes an effect on price. Prices shoot up because, you know, there's more demand than supply can keep up, so prices shoot up. In reverse of that, if there's an overage of supply and not enough demand, well, that's when prices can drop. And so it's this kind of balancing act. But all of that imbalance can cause a difference in fluctuations in price. Launch of new products, obviously something we see all the time. You know, if you spoke to any of these vendors today, they're always showing their latest and greatest. You know, the average lifespan of lots of devices is 6 to 12 months. It can be replaced already by something else. You know, the iPhone 16, you've probably seen billboards around the city centre, that's just came out. Feels like 5 minutes ago we had the iPhone 15, you know, so technology is moving all the time. So as soon as the launch of new products, typically the new product comes in at a higher premium price because it's the latest tech. And then second to that will be the old technology that's being phased out, which will typically be dropped in price, and that will be phased out. Global events, we've seen obviously, unfortunately, all kinds in the last 4 or 5 years. We've had a pandemic, we've had wars, you know, all this unfortunate things that are going on around us. All of these things causes effect on the market in terms of the pricing that we see. And then finally is around material shortages. So all of these vendors all fight over the same materials. You know, so the same plastics and metals and things like this that go into their products, the same raw materials they're all using, they're all fighting over the same thing. So if there's shortages in copper or aluminium or any of these types of things, again, that's all going to have a ripple effect across the market. So some other market conditions, not necessarily going to talk through every single one of these, but these are just other things to be aware of that also throws problems and complexity into the supply chain. So inflation, we've all seen that in the last few years in all walks of life. It's no different in IT. We've seen lots and lots of price increases in the IT space. You know, pretty much as soon as a vendor, one of the tier 1 vendors announces a price increase, everybody else follows suit, and it tends to be the way the market goes. Obviously, the energy and fuel cost crisis, the increases we've seen there, that's all had a big knock-on effect into the pricing that we see coming into the channel. The other interesting one is around mergers and acquisitions. So the market in the last couple of years has seen quite a lot of this going on. There's lots of vendors buying other vendors, distributors buying other distributors, and when these sorts of mergers and acquisitions happen, it causes a knock-on effect with pricing and availability. So, for example, you know, we've got HP out here today. So, I think just over 12 months ago, HP acquired Poly. Poly, you know, huge global manufacturer of audio and video equipment. When HP made that acquisition, what that meant was a big transition in terms of everything from branding, from packaging of the products, from SKU changes on the products, and all of these things causes delays in the market. So there was, for one point in time, there was a drought of, I think, about 3 or 4 months where there was lots of traditional run-of-the-mill headsets that weren't available in the market because they were just going through this transition of changing all their SKUs and packaging and all these kinds of things. So all these things we don't necessarily realise on a day-to-day basis causes these knock-on effects in the market. Exporting and importing, well, welcome to good old Brexit. That's seen lots of problems there. It's not as simple anymore when we want to deploy kit overseas. If we've got offices or other locations in other parts of the country, other parts of Europe. It's not as simple anymore to just go and ship something into Spain or France or whatever. There's lots of legislations and things that we have to adhere to now. So all of that, again, causes a lot of problems. So, and then the final slide in terms of the whole complexity piece I wanted to talk about was technology itself. So as I said before, technology is ever changing and evolving all the time. It's really, really difficult to keep up with that. We talk to these vendors all day, every day, and all the time. They're always talking about they've got to be ahead of the game as far as technology. They've got competition to live up to, and it's just really difficult to keep on top of that. It's also quite difficult actually to be sure of the right product that you're buying as well. So, if you look at a range of devices from any particular manufacturer, they'll have lots of devices that on the face of it might look and feel the same type of product. So, you're all wearing these headsets at the moment. If you want to buy a new headset for your organisation, you might go onto a website, onto a platform, and you might see hundreds of different types of headsets and think, well, how do I know which is the right one to buy for me? It's very difficult sometimes to understand that. That's the vendors add this kind of complexity, but for good reason. There are fundamental differences, but it's difficult as a consumer of those goods to understand what the right things are to buy for your business. Product failures. What I'm referring to here is around manufacturing. So, you might have seen some of this in the press and things like that. If there's a manufacturer launching the latest device and there's a failure in the battery or a particular component and it causes delays in the market because of the deployment of that product into the across the globe. And then finally around technological dependence. And what I'm referring to there is really around kind of components. So lots of manufacturers, again, all fight over the same components. Every laptop device, they're all using Intel CPUs or AMD CPUs. We've all seen probably the CPU shortage a couple of years ago. The whole world was fighting over CPUs. They don't just go into PCs anymore. They go into cars and kettles and toasters and washing machines and all these things that are smart devices all contain a CPU these days now. So there's a big dependence on that inventory of those sorts of components. So that's kind of a bit of a summary of some of the reasons of why we see this kind of volatility and complexity across the market. Certainly not an exhaustive list, but certainly a lot of the main ones. So what I want to cover off now then really is some guidance and advice in terms of how you can overcome some of those things. So first is around transparency across your supply chain. So this is, I guess, really an answer to that first slide in terms of that authorised versus non-authorised supply chain. It's something you need to have confidence in around the supply chain that you're procuring through. What I would say around that is ask the question. So, the supplier that you're working with, ask the question about, where do they buy from? What is the channel that they buy through? Do they buy from distribution? Do they buy from other resellers? It's a completely reasonable question to ask. So do your due diligence around the suppliers that you're working with. Look up on their websites. Look at things like their partner statuses. Things like their accreditations. What do they call themselves? Do they call themselves an IT VAR, a evaluated reseller? Do they call themselves an independent distributor? That sort of language, if you see that term around an independent distributor, is sometimes a little bit of a red flag. That might mean that they're a sub-distributor buying from somebody else, things like that. So it's important to get transparency across actually where you're procuring from. Number two is access to live data sources. So obviously I've mentioned around this volatility in kind of stock and price. These sort of things change all the time. It will never ever be any different, especially when it comes to stock volatility and things like that. So that distribution tier in the channels, that second tier that I mentioned, they output data sources into the market. So they have what we call live data feeds that they will output into the market that you can consume that data. So ProBrand, we have a procurement platform. Carl's going to talk about that in a session later on this afternoon. There are ways that you can consume that data and you can get upfront visibility of the availability of stock and pricing across the entire UK market. So that's a way that you can overcome that. Usually these things are done in very traditional ways. They're usually done by picking up the phone and phoning suppliers, finding out what stock availability they've got, finding out what their latest price is. All of that can be done much more efficiently through these live data sources. Number 3 is vendor and supplier engagement. So something I personally encourage all the time. The engagement you have with a vendor is always going to help help solidify that relationship, and you're going to find out in advance things about new technologies coming on the market, product constraints that might be coming down the road, or all these kinds of things. That's going to come by engaging closer with your suppliers and the vendors. Your suppliers should be able to help facilitate that, almost that three-way, that triangular relationship between you guys as end customers, your reseller partner and the vendor, and that should be something you want to encourage, is that triangular sort of relationship. I'd encourage to do that at least on a quarterly basis. Work as close as you can with your suppliers on things like up and coming projects and things like that, so you can plan a little bit more in advance, so you can help eradicate any potential product constraints that might be coming down the road and things like that. The fourth one is around quote validity. So obviously, as I've said, there can be all kinds of things that can affect pricing, whether it be exchange rates. There could be all kinds of different reasons. When you look at a lot of supplier quotes, they'll have a default quote validity date that's usually stated on that quotation. It doesn't mean that prices can't be held for longer than that. That's just about asking the question and negotiate that with your supplier. So, I see a lot of quotes that come out of suppliers that will just be literally valid for 24 hours. It doesn't mean that they can't hold it for you for longer than that, but that's just down to asking the question. So if you need a longer validity period on that quote, if you need, if you're maybe getting that quotation at the moment for budget purposes, or it's going to take you a few days to sign off that requisition for a purchase order or anything like that, ask the question of your supplier and say, look, can you hold this quote for 7 days or 5 days, or push the boundaries a little bit. That comes with asking the question, and you'll often find that sometimes suppliers will go, yes, actually we can hold it for longer. So don't be afraid to sort of ask that question. The fifth one is around reading blogs and articles. So there's all kinds of content that goes out there in the market. As ProBrand, we put loads and loads of stuff out there on places like LinkedIn, and we put lots of things in IT procurement magazines and websites and all these kinds of things. There's lots of that content that's out there available. It's good to keep ahead of that, keep up to date with those things, get on the mailing list for IT and tech companies, so you can keep ahead of what's actually happening in the market. Things change like really, really quickly. All of a sudden, if there's one major factory output in China that manufactures huge amount of CPUs for Intel, and all of a sudden that's going to have this massive ripple effect through the market, and we might then start to see product constraints that will come in 3 to 6 months' time and things like that. So the earlier you know about these things that's coming, the better, and that's just a good way that you can help keep ahead of the game with that. Engaging with industry experts. So, there's lots of us here today. Connect with us on LinkedIn. I put a lot of content out on LinkedIn. I do lots of talks like this, and lots of things in sort of trade press and procurement magazines and all those kinds of things. So connect with industry experts, mix with the ProBrand staff that's here today. Use us. Feel free if there's something that you want a soundboard or something like that. Drop us an email, give us a call. Just engage and connect. We're more than happy to support and guide and advise our customers with what's happening in the market and how you can kind of overcome some of those things. The seventh one is stock reservations. It's quite something that I don't think our end customers utilise enough. If you'd have asked me about this probably 2, maybe 3 years ago, I'd have said absolutely no chance, when there was lots of product constraints and things like that because of the pandemic. But actually now the market's in a much better shape in terms of supply of product. And stock reservations is something that distribution tier will do all the time. So if you've got if you've got a requirement for 50 of something or 100 of something or whatever it is, ask your reseller partner, say, look, can I reserve this stock because I'm not going to need this stock for another week or another 2 weeks or something like that. Ask for that stock to be reserved, and quite often these days it can be ring fenced. It's of no obligation, there's no commitment to you to do that. All that's going to happen is there'll be a stock reservation that will be put into an ERP system essentially, and it will be ring fenced for you, and it will held for a particular period of time, and it might just buy you some time so that stock doesn't go anywhere. It's going to mitigate the risk of like delaying projects or anything like that. So it's something you can do. Definitely ask the question of your reseller partners, especially if you need like a volume of something and there's maybe limited supply that's in the market of that particular product. And then last but not least is around digitalising processes. So this is a big theme of today. In terms of ProBrand ourselves, we're a very digitally led organisation. Digitalising your processes is something that's going to drive more efficiency in your organisation. It's going to help keep you ahead of the game as far as not doing this traditional process of trying to manage and capture data around stock and price changes and all those kinds of things that goes on in the market. The more you're digitalised from that point of view, the more you're automated. It's going to help remove that kind of traditional day-to-day sort of process and enable you to focus on more strategic things. So we can talk, I could stand here and talk for probably 3 or 4 hours around how you can digitalise and drive more efficiency in your procurement. So certainly talk to us more about that today while you're here for sure. So. And that's it. So thanks for your time. Is there any questions? I need to just put my headset on just in case there is. No? No questions? That means it was super insightful, I guess, and I've answered everything that everybody had. So that's all good. If there's no questions, okay.